Good news of the day. Jesus Christ died for our sins, and he has given you eternal life. He loves you infinitely, and he wants you to join him in eternal life in heaven with the Father and the Holy Spirit. You're valuable and important to him, and you have great worth in his eyes. If you're struggling or going through something difficult, you're going to get through it. You're strong. Jesus loves you, and he is with you. He is ready to be accepted into your heart at any time. Ask for forgiveness for your sins and accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, and you will be saved. Please know how loved and special you are and how you're an irreplaceable child of God. Stay strong and take care of yourself.
Hello, welcome back to my channel. Yeah.
I'm going to give a quick trigger warning and spoiler warning. For the trigger warnings, we have mentions of suicide and nihilism. And for the spoiler warnings, we have the Sumeru Archon Quest, the inversion of Genesis, otherwise known as Scaramouche's Archon Quest, the OG Parade of Providence limited time event, the one with the Inner Darshan Championship, the whole thing. It's a rewrite of it. So obviously there's spoilers for the original. So, yeah. So everybody, welcome to my rewrite of the Inner Darshan Championship quest, also known as the Parade of Providence. And so go ahead and step right up, take a seat, buckle in tight. It's going to be a fun one. So before I just start complaining and listing off all the issues that the writing has, I'm going to list some positive things that I did like about the original story. So one, I think the premise is really good, a competition between different playable characters that the audience all know and love. I think that's a really fun and creative ideas, and I gotta give the writers props for it. And I also thought it was just a really great chance for the characters who don't usually interact, they get to bounce off each other, and characters who have never met, it's a chance for them to get to know each other. So the premise of a competition overall is really great because there's conflict and intrigue baked into the very fabric of its being, that being who will win the competition. How will the contestants try and one-up each other? Will alliances or rivalries be formed as the competition goes on? I just think it's a really great setup, and I really enjoyed it. And I also thought it was a nice change of pace from the usual festival-style events. Also, in the original, Kaveh is a standout to me, and his decision to smash the diadem was like the only really poignant moment for me throughout the whole event. It genuinely took me by surprise, and I thought the writers did a pretty good job showing off Kaveh's personality and virtue as a character who is pretty new to the audience, so they made me like him, which I think was one of the goals of the quest in the writer's room, I also thought the writers did a pretty good job of overall showing the characters' different personalities, strengths, and weaknesses throughout the different challenges, and I thought the writers came up with pretty fun and creative ideas for each round. So we'll be keeping those challenges for each round the same as in the original in our rewrite, and we're also going to be keeping Kaveh's decision to smash the diadem, of course, and we're going to be keeping the original premise of the quest, which is the Inner Darshan Championship. Otherwise, it wouldn't be much of a rewrite, and it would just be an entirely original fanfic. I also liked how in the original, the Traveler is like the announcer, commentator, MC. I just thought that was really funny and a good, believable excuse for them to be involved with the competition. So suffice to say, we'll be keeping that as well. So that's unfortunately all I have to say for the positives, though. So let's move on to some of the problems with the original Parade of Providence / Inner Darshan Championship questlines writing. So the first issue is that Kaveh's character arc, and it's not even really an arc, but his big decision to smash the diadem happens at the last minute. It isn't really built up to or explored as much as it could be. It just totally comes out of nowhere. Another issue is the introductions of the ideas of nihilism to the plot. They're introduced at the last minute, and they're not really explored well. The writers are also, in my opinion, too wishy-washy about nihilism as a belief system without coming to any too strong conclusions about it. I also thought Mushi's first appearance since the Archon Quest, and he doesn't really do anything, so I thought that was a total waste. And I also think he acts a little out of character as well, being too good too fast. I thought this Sachin investigation was not really that interesting or well explored, and there's also no emotional core or through line to the story. The writing is jumbled and bloated with too many ideas shoved inside these 3 bursting at the seams chapters. And then my last issue I had with the writing was that some of the characters' relationships are too ambiguous and unclear. So our goal in our rewrite is going to be fix all of these writing issues. Now also, I'm going to go ahead and give you a brief overline for my rewrite. Then we're going to actually do the rewrite, and then I'm going to kind of justify and go over why I made some changes that I did at the end. So for my rewrite, I'm going to be focusing on an ideological struggle between Kaveh and actually Scaramouche. By the way, just for terminology's sake, I'm going to be calling Wanderer slash Scaramouche or Mushi throughout this video because we all named him different things, and it's just easiest to honestly call him the original name we all know him by. And I'll use Mushi a lot because that's the little nickname I have for him, and it's just shorter. And I don't like calling him Wanderer because Wanderer is really a title. It's like what someone is, it's not their name, which is like he's never actually called really Wanderer. Like, you name him at the end of his quest when he gives up the name of Scaramouche and stuff like that, at least to my knowledge. So just for like simplicity's sake, we're going with Scaramouche or Mushi. So anyway, so in my rewrite, we're going to be focusing on an ideological struggle between Kaveh and Scaramouche. Mushi believes that nothing that you really do matters, and this is fueled by everything that happened with the tree in the Inversion of Genesis questline, and that's led to these beliefs. And Kaveh, on the other hand, believes that all your actions and your kindnesses do matter, and he believes in the fact that you can make the world a better place. In my rewrite, we're going to put the Sachin thing more in the background because it's really rather dark, and we're going to make Scaramouche the representative of nihilism in his place, as many of Scaramouche's voice lines in the game represent this idea anyway. Another change I'm also going to be making is that the diadem will be used more as a plot device to enable character growth and less as a mystery, since I didn't think they really did a good job with that anyway. We're also going to be giving the other contestants in the story a more clear purpose in the plot by allowing them to be what allows Kaveh to win against Mushi in the final match, which is also true in canon, but with the added context in my rewrite of Kaveh's kind and generous actions being the reason they are willing to help him win. As in canon, it really just comes more across like the other contestants are just attacking Mushi to try to attain the diadem for themselves, which I'm pretty sure they actually are. So, with my little overview out of the way, let's go ahead and get started on Act 1. We'll start the quest the same way, with Traveler and the Paimon hearing of the Academia Extravaganza and the competition and being hired as MCs. Once again, I already stated I thought this was a really cute concept and a good reason for our protagonist to actually be there talking to everyone without anything feeling too forced. The Traveler and Paimon arrive at the competition's place and meet the contestants as they do in canon. The first change I'm going to be making is that the usually happy-go-lucky Traveler starts feeling very off-kilter and saddened while in the presence of the diadem to give our audience a gentle, soft idea that something may be off about the pretty circlet. Instead of them, as in canon, seeing Sachin's ghost or whatever, because personally I thought that choice was like hammy as hell and about as subtle as a slap to the face with a cold dead fish. So anyway, they're just going to be feeling a little off and a little sad. And Paimon's going to notice this and they're going to be like, are you all right? And Traveler's going to answer and say, oh, I'm feeling a little bit down for some reason. Paimon's going to brush it off saying, oh, I'm sure you'll feel better later. You're probably just tired. Maybe some food will give you energy. Let's eat some lapad fish rolls after this. Knowing Paimon, that's probably what she'd say. Traveler's also going to note that once the diadem is removed from the stage, that they're suddenly feeling a lot better, but they won't, nor Paimon, will make the connection between the diadem and what caused their downtrodden mood. So once again, in the rewrite, we're going to be emphasizing the diadem as a symbol of nihilism and giving up hope on the world, rather than it really being like interlinked with Sachin's character and background specifically, as in my version, Sachin himself is more of a symbol than a character. So this change works better to keep things more grounded and less goofy without old dude ghosts just randomly materializing out of thin air. Then, as in the original version, the Traveler is going to go around and speak to each of the contestants, hearing everyone's reasons for joining the competition. Mushi's reasons for joining, as in canon, are left obscured for now. Then the interaction between Layla and the Traveler and Mushi that happens in canon occurs. Layla explaining that she doesn't want to use astrology to win the competition because she believes astrology should be used for only more dignified purposes. It doesn't align with her values to win the competition in that way. Mushi, as he does in canon, remarks that is stupid and that the stars don't care about how you use them and they don't care about you at all and you should just do whatever it takes to win. Before Layla or the Traveler can defend her, Kaveh, overhearing the debate, comes over and defends Layla's choice, which is the first major change we're going to be making to the story. Kaveh explains that he thinks that it's noble that Layla won't compromise her values just to win a competition, and he encourages her selflessly to compete in the competition in her own way, not compromising what she believes is right. Mushi is genuinely pretty pissed off by Kaveh's answer. How dare this pathetic mortal question his judgment and be so confident and happy all while doing so? Disgusted, Scaramouche claims that Kaveh will never be able to win the competition like that, and neither will Layla. He pointedly doesn't bother using either of their names, especially Kaveh's, as he feels they are too insignificant to bother learning their names. The Traveler teases Scaramouche lightly, saying that he better prove that fact during the upcoming rounds, which Scaramouche, now vexed, promises darkly that he will. The next change that we're going to be making in my rewrite is that Scaramouche is actually going to be trying extremely hard to win the competition because of this original exchange with the Traveler, Kaveh, and Layla. Scara is very prideful, so it would make sense that he wouldn't want to be beaten by a bunch of mortals. In fact, it would be incomprehensible to him that such a fact could even happen. I believe he probably originally was not going to try that hard because he's arrogant once again, so he didn't think the mortals could ever beat him. But in my version, after talking to the Traveler, Kaveh, and Layla, Scaramouche feels very determined to prove that his philosophy of doing whatever it takes to win, no matter what, is the right one, and that he's going to show these pathetic little meatbags how a real ex-harbinger gets shit done. He leaves, clearly annoyed with everyone involved. Traveler's amused that they were able to get under his skin. The Traveler then goes on to wish both Kaveh and Layla luck, and tell them not to worry about Mushi after Kaveh expresses concern, and then the Traveler wishes them good luck for the first round of the competition. So the first round of the competition begins, and it plays out mostly as it does in canon, except in my version, Scaramouche actually tries and succeeds in getting one of the Swiftflies released into the city. Scaramouche can fly, and he's had a lot of experience in just being alive, so he could probably recognize the modified ones from the real runs. He's also probably fast enough to just literally pluck a Swiftfly out of the air. To add to his win no matter what it takes philosophy, we're even going to have him actually steal Tighnari's butterfly. Tighnari, as in canon, uses the incense that makes the Swiftflies attracted to his area, while Scaramouche just lies and waits. But then, when one of the modified Swiftflies shows itself, he flies over and snatches it before Tighnari can capture it. The Traveler witnesses this, and Paimon already complains that this feels against the rules. Traveler will double check the rules, but there's nothing against this strategy as Scaramouche took the butterfly before Tighnari actually had it in his hands. Tighnari grumbles and goes off to try his incense in a different area without marauding, stealing puppets flying about. Scaramouche, feeling satisfied with himself and cocky, brags to the Traveler about how he's first, and he got the first Swiftfly, and Traveler is amused by his antics, but assures him that the competition isn't over yet. Mushi grumbles but claims that nobody will be able to beat him, even if and I quote, they all banded together and tried some kumbaya friendship alliance against me, neatly foreshadowing how the event will actually end. There is a rule that each contestant can only get one Swiftfly, so Scaramouche returns to the scoring area. Tighnari, as in canon, gets the next Swiftfly, and then returns to the scoring area as well. Faruzan and Kaveh work together as they do in canon and get the last Swiftfly. I'll hate them as in canon says they can't split the points. Just in my version, he explains without compromise that they cannot split a single point in half. Kaveh just offers outright for Faruzan to take the point, and Mushi nearby overhears this and gets visibly annoyed, degrading Kaveh again, not using his name, for being so weak and foolish. Scaramouche brags that he is in first place because he has what it takes to win. Kaveh denies this belief system, saying he wouldn't want to win if it was done in the wrong way, which gets under Mushi's skin more than he'll admit, and he storms off. Faruzan suggests to be more fair, they do lots, but she is clearly touched by Kaveh, her junior's willingness to sacrifice his point to her, especially knowing that he wants the prize money because he's in a difficult financial situation while she's just competing to get more students to attend her classes. It's made clear to the audience that Faruzan is not only touched by the action of Kaveh, but also seems to respect him more after this. Just as in canon, Faruzan wins the lots and receives the point. Kaveh is obviously disappointed, but accepts the result graciously, endearing himself to the Traveler who doesn't know him very well yet. The Traveler now secretly wants Kaveh to win the competition. End of Act 1. We start Act 2 with a scene either the Traveler overhears or just happens fully independent of the Traveler. Mushi is about to head off to the desert when Nahida stops him to wish him good luck and thank him for agreeing to be in the competition. She reminds him gently to not forget to keep an eye on things for her. our first hint to the audience as why Mushi joined such a ridiculous contest for pathetic mortals in the first place, cluing us in that it was Nahida's request. He assures her that he won't, and she asks gently, showing us the care and trust she has for him, how he's feeling, as she's nothing if not attentive and having warm feelings for him. He tells her that he's fine, of course he is, but we hear a thought line from him saying something along the lines of, "At least I am now. I felt really crappy earlier at that introduction ceremony. I mean, it is ridiculous and honestly a bit humiliating I'm even doing this, but I feel much better now. Must have been a passing mood or something. But I can't let this childlike god see any of that. She might decide I'm of no use to her after all if she senses any hesitation to enact her will on my end." This line from Scaramouche has a dual purpose. One, it acts as foreshadowing again, as fans paying close attention will remember that the diadem was present, at least before it was taken down and away at the introduction ceremony. There is something ominous and off about that circlet. The other purpose is we get a deeper look into Mushi's state of mind at this point and his understanding of his relationship with Nahida. Mushi has had his trust and self-esteem crushed and warped so many times, he really can't believe that Nahida is using him as anything more than a tool for her own ends, and he believes that if he becomes useless to her, she'll discard him like everyone else in his life has, and that's the only reason he agreed to this humiliation competing against mortals. Huh, who did they think they were to compete against the likes of him? He's still the arrogant Mushi we know and love, just slightly broken down and downtrodden at this point. He feels more trust in the Traveler actually than in Nahida, as the Traveler was actually the one to care about him enough to bring him back. He is blind to how much Nahida cares and treasures him. He brags to her before he leaves that he's in first place in the competition, and he's going to win the whole thing, seeking praise and validation the way he used to do from El Dottore. Nahida gives him the praise he's looking for, but to the audience, we can see that Nahida couldn't care less about him winning the competition. She cares about him, and her eyes are warm and tender when she looks at him. He tells her he'll win the competition and successfully complete the mission she's assigned him before being about to take off. Right as he's about to leave, she just makes him promise to be careful, saying he can't accomplish anything if he doesn't take care of himself. Mushi is momentarily baffled by this statement, then sourly remarks in his head, "Must be worried about her new toy getting broken." He scoffs out a sarcastic, sort of mean response, something along the lines of, "There's no need to worry, I'm not as fragile as you." But Nahida peacefully takes no offense, knowing how he is. Then Mushi takes off for the desert. We then cut to the beginning of the second round of the competition that plays out mostly as it does in canon, with Nilou and Alhaitham laying out the rules and noting the limited water rations. Also the same as in canon, we see Sino asks Tainari if he'll be okay in the desert heat, and Tainari assures him that he will be. Then off the contestants go. Things play out mostly as they do in canon from here on out. Tainari collapses from the heat, and the Traveler finds him greatly concerned. Tainari, as he does in canon, explains he's weak to the heat and that he ran out of his water rations. Traveler goes to give him some of theirs, only for Paimon.
"Sorry, Paimon was thirsty. Even a giant Hydra slime would melt out here."
To find that Paimon drank all their water rations. Mushi, doing his same tricks as before, has been watching for someone else to locate a leyline disruptor and then take it for himself. He sees Tainari and the Traveler off in the distance. He flies down and lands and comes over to the two and then begins to deride mortals, Tainari weak but conscious and listening, for being so weak and physically fragile. Traveler, having a bit less patience for his antics than usual, as Tainari, their close friend, is suffering and hurting right now, asks Mushi, less than politely, to be pleasing to Mushi, for his water rations to give to Tainari, as the Traveler knows the Scaramouche doesn't need them, being a puppet who doesn't have to eat or drink. Mushi scoffs and even mocks Traveler for this idea, announcing you have to be moronic to help your competition. Traveler is now very pissed at him. Paimon calls him a big meanie, which Mushi just scoffs at. "You're just mad I'm gonna win this whole pathetic little competition and get that diadem for myself. Why are you even participating if it's such a pathetic little competition?" The Traveler, now full on frustrated with the difficult and quarrelsome Scaramouche challenges. "You were so annoyingly vague earlier. Are you doing this just to mess with people and ruin anyone else's chances of actually having fun?" It devolves into a full-on argument, which a weak Tighnari tries to stop, assuring the traveler that it's fine. Mushi is right that the two of them are competitors and that Mushi doesn't have any obligation to share his water with him. Plus, he says, I'd hate for him to give up some of his water for me and then end up being dehydrated later because of my own shortcoming of being unable to deal well with the heat. This just makes the traveler even madder because Tighnari is such a nice guy, and no, Mushi doesn't need the water, he's just being difficult. Overhearing the loud argument, which only descends further into chaos, Kaveh comes over and asks what the matter is. Scaramouche snorts at him to keep out of it, but the traveler, exasperated, explains the situation. Kaveh doesn't even blink nor deride Mushi for his stinginess of not sharing his rations. Kaveh simply kneels down, gives Tighnari his water rations, and begins attending to him, informing calmly but urgently that they need to get Tighnari back to base camp and out of this sweltering heat. Traveler agrees quickly, honestly embarrassed that Mushi had distracted them with their childish bickering match from the real matter at hand, which is Tighnari's safety. Mushi, a little pissed at being suddenly ignored, derides Kaveh again, saying he hopes he passes out from heat exhaustion in the desert as a reward for his foolishness, which earns him an outraged glare from the traveler. But Kaveh ignores the jab, already from the short few interactions he's had with him, knowing what kind of person Mushi is, and knowing it would be a waste of breath to argue with him. Kaveh then suggests him and the traveler get Tighnari back to camp together. Traveler agrees eagerly as Scaramouche flies off. As they walk, Tighnari thanks Kaveh and the traveler both, saying he feels horrible about keeping Kaveh from the competition as they walk along. Kaveh insists that it's fine and that Tighnari's health is far more important than any competition, and there's always next round anyway. But Tighnari and the traveler look to each other worriedly, knowing that if Kaveh doesn't score any points in this round, since he sits at 0 points now, it will be extremely hard for him to win the competition. Luckily for the three of them, they run into Cyno and Layla in a cave in the desert, hiding in the shade. Cyno actually having been looking for Tighnari, saying that he was worried about him in the heat, knowing his best friend's weakness to it. After hearing the traveler's reports, which Tighnari tries to brush off, Cyno worriedly chides Tighnari for pushing himself so hard. The exchange that happens in canon between them occurs, with Tighnari saying that he at least had to try, and now he did, and now he knew his limits. Kaveh praises him for trying, assuring enthusiastically that sometimes you need to try things you were pretty sure wouldn't work out to know how far you could go. The traveler and Tighnari both make dry expressions, both clearly worried about Kaveh's optimism that was a little naive and maybe what kept getting him into financial troubles in the first place. Cyno is so grateful for Kaveh giving his water rations to Tighnari that he agrees with him thankfully. Kaveh complains that Alhaitham would find that idea foolish, but he proclaims that you'd never know your limits or what you could do if you didn't even try, which everyone, even the anxious Layla, smiles at. Paimon whispers to the traveler,
Paimon really likes this guy. He's so upbeat.
Once again reminding the audience that this is the first real time that Paimon and the traveler have spent any time with Kaveh. Then the conversation between Layla and Tighnari happens as it does in canon, only Kaveh is still there when this conversation occurs. Both Tighnari's wisdom and Kaveh's cheerful encouragement give Layla the confidence she needs to keep trying in this competition, and she takes off to go find one of those leyline disruptors. Kaveh's encouragement is extra meaningful to Layla because he praised her for getting so far while not going against her convictions, which he had praised her for all the way back in Act 1. Kaveh says that sticking by one's convictions, even when it is hard or more tempting or easy to let your principles crumble, is the mark of true strength and character. This line foreshadows his decision at the end of the tournament. With Layla off and running, Cyno assures Kaveh that he can help the traveler get Tighnari back to camp, and Kaveh, ever selfless, tries to resist, but eventually relents, actually wanting to win the competition and stop having to suffer with Alhaitham as his roommate. Kaveh agrees begrudgingly and takes off. Tighnari insists Cyno go back to the competition, that he's fine on his own after his rest in the shade, but Cyno, the ever-diligent General Mahamatra, knows other people's safety is worth more than a limited edition trading card, and he insists to the traveler that he's got Tighnari, and he suggests that the traveler go back to reporting the facts of the competition. Traveler begrudgingly agrees, a little worried about what a pissed off Mushi might be doing, and heads off, entrusting Sino to get Tainari safely back to the camp. Traveler goes to check in on Faruzan first, seeing Mushi's beacon was also nearby, but by the time they arrive, Faruzan is alone and furious. Traveler sees that there is a clear place where a leyline disruptor was dug up, but it's gone. Asking what's wrong, Faruzan lays into Hat Guy, saying he swooped in like a terrible vulture and snatched up her hard sought out leyline disruptor. She's furious beyond almost all reason. She said she tried to defend it, but he was too fast and dodged all of her attacks and got away. Paimon yells, agreeing with her outrage, "That's gotta be against the rules!" And while the traveler is disapproving, they doubt it. Alhaitham said that such a strategy was legitimate, if not underhanded as all heck, in the first round. Still, the traveler promises the upset Faruzan that they will check with Alhaitham if Mushi or Hat Guy violated any rules and encourages her to not give up. The round isn't over yet. Faruzan huffs angrily for another moment, then collects herself, quickly agreeing, mumbling to herself then an outburst such as this is not befitting of a lady of her age. And then she takes off, determined not to give up this contest yet. Seeing as Mushi's beacon has already hit base camp, the traveler moves on to Layla's beacon. As in canon, sleepwalking, Layla explains to the traveler how she found the disruptor, and then comes back to base camp to collect her points. Finally, the traveler heads to Sino's beacon, and when they find him, he is watching from up on a cliff, and down below, Kaveh and Faruzan are digging up a leyline disruptor together. Sino sighs and says he guess he'll have no points this round as well. Paimon suggests, remembering Mushi's bad antics absent-mindedly, that Sino could steal the disruptor from them when they dig it up. But Sino is, of course, repulsed by the very idea and scolds Paimon for even bringing up such a dishonorable idea. Paimon blurts, defending herself, that that's what Scaramouche was doing. Sino is surprised by this, unaware of this behavior. Tainari had kept the incident to himself from the first round of having his swift fly stolen, being as Tainari is not the type to cause a fuss, especially knowing how ironclad Sino takes the rules, and not wanting to send his friend into a fit or cause any issues or drama during the competition. Tainari's own real goal of increasing attendance to the lecture in Gandharvodil next month was already achieved anyway. Sino condemns Scaramouche's behavior as completely unhonorable and unacceptable, and proclaims he'd rather lose with dignity than win with deceitful tactics like those. The traveler agrees with a dry expression, momentarily wondering why Nahida was letting Mushi compete in the first place, acknowledging he was kind of ruining the lighthearted atmosphere for the other contestants while in this competition. Sino says that he's going to check with Alhaitham and Nilu if anything Scaramouche has done so far has been against the rules. Traveler nods as he wanders off, and then the traveler and Paimon head down to meet up with Kaveh and Faruzan. Just as in canon, Faruzan and Kaveh explain that they arrived at the leyline disruptor at the same time and thought it would be only fair to dig it up together and then once again pull lots to see who would get the points. Kaveh looks a little depressed at the idea, knowing his luck is pretty terrible, and Faruzan offers to just give him the points as she got them in the first round when they worked together, and once again just respecting and appreciating Kaveh. Kaveh denies this, insisting he's okay with drawing lots. He'd feel terrible knowing he took them from her unfairly. Faruzan insists it would be fine, but he continues to insist they draw lots. She gives in and they begin together to take the leyline disruptor back to our village. The traveler and Paimon walk slightly behind Kaveh and Faruzan, and as they walk, Paimon mentions that Kaveh seems to be his own worst enemy in this competition, lamenting the fact that she was frustrated watching him not take the points that Faruzan was willing to just give him. Paimon asks quietly if maybe Scaramouche has a point and you can't win a competition like this being so selfless and kind as Kaveh is. Paimon talks through her thoughts aloud, saying she's very annoyed with Mushi and that what he's doing is clearly wrong and underhanded. Paimon expresses she expects nothing less from him, which makes the traveler chuckle. But then the traveler gets a little downtrodden as they confess that Mushi is winning the competition, though, by a good margin. He's taken first in both rounds. And the traveler was now beginning to wonder if maybe he had a point and you have to be a little cutthroat to win. And not just in this competition, but maybe in life too. Kaveh always seems to be the cause of his own problems, including his financial ones. Paimon, saddened, laments that maybe the god complex puppet has a point in there somewhere, before with frustration explaining how she hates to think that any little thing he ever said could be right. The traveler laughs at that, but at the same time is clearly feeling a little frustrated. They go silent, eyes darkening a bit, feeling that it was a little depressing that Scaramouche may end up winning this competition, and honestly looked to be the winner already, when he was literally being so awful to everyone else and doing things in the most underhanded, dishonest way possible. And that Kaveh, a man who had been nothing but kind and selfless since this competition had started, had 0 points and was likely to still have 0 points when this round concluded. It just didn't seem fair or just at all. Paimon and the traveler arrive back in Aru village, wondering each to themselves if this was all pointless, if the outcome of this competition was already decided and there was no point in trying anymore. As Farazan and Kaveh talk to Nilou and Alhaitham, saying they're going to use lots again to decide who gets the points. Alhaitham goes to deride Kaveh for his martyr complex, but Mushi, lurking in the background, beats him to the punch. Alhaitham, Nilou, and honestly everyone there is a little shocked at the derision and intensity of Mushi's admonishment. It clearly goes beyond the friendly expected trash talk of competitors and goes way over the line, becoming personal. Before anyone can defend Kaveh, Mushi goes on to boast that he is in first place in this competition and Kaveh is in last, tied with that irrelevant General Mahamatra. And now he's giving up the chance at his one single measly point for what, fairness? Mushi scoffs and announces that it's like he wants to lose. Alhaitham, to everyone's surprise, is the one to cut Mushi off and say curtly, "You've made your point. Perhaps you should go now to prepare for your grand victory in the final round." Everyone present is appalled by Mushi's behavior, and sensing the tension, Mushi calls the bunch of them losers and fucks off. Traveler apologizes on behalf of him to Kaveh, but Kaveh laughs it off, saying he's been through worse, but thanking Alhaitham, saying he was surprised Alhaitham would defend him of all people in the first place. Alhaitham assures him that he still thought Kaveh was being foolish and giving the chance to lose the points to Farazan, but saying that he equally disagreed with a lot of Scaramouche's actions throughout the competition, expressing that people who were confident in their own abilities didn't have to leech off others for their victories. Everyone around them agrees, all of the contestants having overheard Mushi's verbal evisceration of Kaveh and now fully making an enemy of Mushi in their minds if they hadn't had reasons to already dislike the man currently sitting at the number 1 spot. The lots are drawn and Kaveh actually wins to everyone's surprise. Kaveh is so happy and relieved to almost the point of tears, just like he is in the canon version, reminding the audience that Kaveh really does want to win the prize, endearing himself to the audience even further by letting us know that all his sacrifices really were sacrifices. But he just helps people because it's in his nature to do so, even when he does have to lose things that he really desperately wants. Kaveh's just a kind, selfless person who's willing to put others above himself. The traveler thinks with a bit of sadness, it's Kaveh who deserves to win this competition and to catch a break finally, but is doubtful in their heart that that will actually happen. End of Act 2. Now, the start of Act 3 in the original starts with the traveler in Sumatra investigating the origins of the diadem and Sachin's research, but since we haven't been focusing on that not very put together side plot in the first place, we're going to open on an entirely new scene, focusing more on the ideological conflict between the characters that has been the main emotional focal point of our story thus far. The scene opens this time to the traveler talking to Nahida outside the sanctuary of Surasthana. The traveler laments in a heated way that Scaramouche is ruining the competition for everyone else. He's taken something fun and has made it so not that. He's being terrible. He's using underhanded tactics, and the traveler vents that they have no idea why Nahida allowed him to compete in the first place. Nahida asks pointedly if Scaramouche has hurt anyone, and the traveler begrudgingly admits that no, he hasn't hurt anyone. Not physically, anyway. Paimon helpfully explains that, well, no, but he's being really mean and awful to everyone, and he's making this competition no fun at all. Nahida chuckles apologetically and apologizes for his very bad behavior. She then confides in the traveler the real reason why she let Mushi compete in the competition. She tells the traveler just straight up that she suspects that something is wrong with the diadem of knowledge. She read reports from 20 years ago when this competition last took place that the person who won and got the diadem placed on their head was reported to have some strange personality changes and then ran into some trouble and met an unknown end. This new information concerns the traveler greatly, them not really having put together that anything was wrong with the diadem up to this point. Nahida explains that she was still stuck within the sanctuary then, 20 years ago when it happened by the sages, and therefore, while she heard about this when it was happening through the Akasha, she was unable to do anything further to help this person that had received the diadem or investigate, as there was little information about the diadem itself or where it even came from within the Akasha. This greatly concerned her, so when the competition came around this time, she decided to let Scaramouche compete in the competition to keep an eye on what was going on and hopefully win the diadem for her. She had given him specific instructions for when he won to not place it on his head, but rather give it to her to study, so she could figure out if anything was wrong with it. The traveler takes a few minutes to process all of this, Mushi's intense drive to win the competition, and his entry in the first place finally making a lick of sense. Then asking Nahida why she couldn't have just taken the diadem since she was the Dendro Archon and maybe replaced it with a fake or something. Nahida explains that she had already thought of that and even tried to do so, but when she tried to study the diadem before, it wasn't giving off any strange readings or effects. She suspected that maybe its more unusual properties would only show itself during the competition, as she did sense some kind of vague strange energy from it, but she couldn't get it to activate. As a goddess of wisdom, always curious about the world around her and the mysteries that seemed to just be waiting to be solved, Nahida was determined to find out the exact cause of what was up with the diadem, and that could only be done by allowing it to be offered as the prize within the competition. She hoped that by having Mushi win it according to the rules of the contest, perhaps the unique properties of the diadem would reveal themselves and then she could study it properly. After digesting this, Paimon asked if she was really okay with all the underhanded tactics that Mushi was using to win the competition. Nahida admitted honestly, looking apologetic again, that they would not be her preference to win with and that she was sorry his behavior was ruining the other contestants' time, but asked for the traveler to be understanding of Mushi's background and situation. He had been in the Fatui for over 300 years, an organization that promoted deceit, trickery, and whatever it took to get the job done. Failure was not just unacceptable, it was grounds for termination. He's endured centuries of that conditioning and plenty of other hardship to make him believe that this is the only effective way to accomplish his goals. So while Nahida admitted she didn't approve of his tactics, she was grateful he was willing to do this for her, something he surely had to swallow his pride to accomplish, and she was very grateful for that. Traveler thinks this over, being a bit surprised by how far Nahida's kindness and understanding for Scaramouche actually ran. Perhaps the travelers, somewhere in their own heart, had also thought Nahida was using Scaramouche to her own ends. Not bad ends, but for her own ends nonetheless. But looking at her now, the traveler saw nothing but an almost maternal love for him in her eyes. It was strange, the traveler thought, considering Scaramouche had tried to dethrone her as god of her own country, and they couldn't help but ask why Nahida was so attached to him and even trusted him at all in the first place. Traveler very frankly admitted that if they were in her place, they probably would have just thrown him in a jail cell or something like that. Nahida laughed softly and admitted that would be a totally valid response. But then she expressed calmly that throwing Mushi in a jail cell wouldn't make him any less bitter or angry at the world, which is what caused him to be so destructive and violent in the first place. Nahida says that she thought it would benefit him and everyone around him to rather instead attempt to slowly reintegrate him and reteach him about society, about life, about the world. Show him that the world could be a good, wonderful place instead of the bad experiences that the world had taught him that it was. The traveler listened quietly as Nahida became a little less professional sounding and a little more meek sounding as she admitted that there was definitely a personal element to it as well. She confessed that when she made contact with his young divine consciousness, back when he was attempting to be the god of Sumeru and usurp her, and what she had saw of his life through Eldothlori's memories, she had seen a boy who had been unwanted and discarded and misused over and over again. He so desperately wanted to be wanted and approved of, and Nahida confessed quietly that she related to that feeling she held in her own heart. For centuries, the sages had locked her away and made her believe that she was not good enough, that she was inferior to Greater Lord Rukkhadevata, that she wasn't intelligent enough, she wasn't capable enough. But Nahida expressed, looking grateful and thankful, that after meeting the traveler and meeting her subjects that trusted her and loved her, that they gave her the confidence she needed to really bloom like a flower into the god she always could have been. She confessed that she hoped she could be that kind of voice, that kind of person for Scaramouche as well, so that he could slowly bloom as well and become the person that perhaps he was always destined to be, or the person that he chose to become. Traveler thought over what she said carefully and then relented, admitting that they didn't understand all of that, but that they trusted Nahida, trusted in her judgment and her character, her wisdom, for lack of a better word. She was their close friend, and the traveler had not forgotten any of the things she had done for them. The traveler said they hoped that Scaramouche could one day live up to her hopes and become the person that Nahida thought he could be. Nahida smiled happily at that, feeling as if she had won a little bit of their argument and once again having a ridiculous soft spot for Mushi, and then challenged that she was surprised that the traveler didn't understand her feelings at all, noting how far the traveler went to save Mushi when even she did not know he was missing. The traveler gets a bit self-conscious and unsure at that and explained with some sheepishness that just because he's a bad person doesn't mean he didn't deserve to exist anymore. Just because people do bad things doesn't mean they aren't worth anything. The traveler goes quiet and sullen, and it is pretty clear to the audience that they are thinking of their sibling, who is now leader of the Abyss Order. The traveler continues on, saying, I didn't even know everything he had gone through at that point. I didn't even know him all that well, the traveler continues, but I just knew he was a full person. A person who deserved to still be here because we all have something to offer. We all have people who love us, even if we make big mistakes. Lives have immeasurable value in this world. Nahida smiled approvingly and thanked the traveler for being kind and tolerant with Mushi and for being her friend and helping to save her from the sages and, ironically enough, from Mushi himself. Nahida thanked the traveler for trusting in her judgment, for helping her when things got hard. Nahida promises that she'd never forget the traveler's kindness and always would help the traveler in any way that she could. The traveler thanks her as well and said that they truly valued having her as their friend. The sweet moment was broken by beeps from the traveler's contestant tracker and them saying, oh crap, I'm late. Nahida chuckled sweetly and said, you better hurry up, great MC, you're gonna miss all the action. Traveler smiled as well and said, see you, Nahida, and took off. The traveler arrived to find everyone lined up at the beginning ceremony for the third and final round of the competition. Alhaitham and Nilu are on stage, announcing to a gathered crowd the rules of the last round. Whoever puts the diadem, which will be hidden shortly, on the podium gets enough points to win the whole competition. The contestants are lined up for the crowd to see, and the diadem is on stage between them and the announcers. We see a quick cycling through of their thoughts. Tainari is wondering why he's even still here, his goal accomplished, and thinking that big-headed jerk is probably just going to snatch the diadem right out of my hands, just like the swift fly he took. Farazan has thoughts of a similar vein, as does Layla, all feeling uncharacteristically pessimistic and unmotivated for the final round, being under the effects of the diadem unknowingly. Sino is a little less pessimistic compared to the others about his shot at winning, but his thoughts turn to hopelessness by the diadem, think this whole competition has been unhonorable anyway. What is the point of me even competing in such a ridiculous farce of a contest? Scaramouche's thoughts have been brought down into the truest, darkest spiral, his pessimistic and fatalist nature making him perfect prey for the diadem's effects through, once again, the audience hasn't been told outright this is what the diadem does, though prospective viewers may have figured it out by now. Scaramouche is spiraling in his mind. This competition is stupid and beneath our great stature. You used to be the grand Fatui Harbinger, number 6 of all of them, but look at you now, so pathetic, so fallen, desperately playing pointless games with mere mortals for some childlike goddess that you couldn't even defeat in combat. The doctor was right to abandon us. What worth do we have to anyone anymore? Nobody even remembers us, except the traveler and Nahida. What is the point of any of this? Nothing I do ever seems to matter. Even when I tried to erase myself from this wretched world, I failed to do even that correctly. While in the darkest state of mind, Scaramouche still forces himself to soldier on, more being used to having to complete missions in a bad headspace to begin with. Just complete the mission, you miserable puppet, he thought to himself, and then maybe we can avoid being locked up in a cage like an animal. Kaveh, notably, is the only one who looks in high spirits, and his thoughts are jovial. It's not over yet, his thoughts ring out in a cheerful way. I may have been suffering from a bout of bad luck, but I think my luck is finally changing. I actually won the lots from the desert, and the competition is anyone's for the taking now. I'm gonna get that Mora and get myself back on my own 2 feet. No storm can last forever. The traveler and Paimon watching note everyone, minus Kaveh's dour appearance, and Paimon questions, why do they all look so glum? The traveler responds, interpreting incorrectly, that maybe everyone but Scaramouche is depressed because they think he basically has already won the competition. Traveler at this point knows something is up with the diadem. Nahida just told them as much, but they still haven't put the clues together. They, close enough to be slightly affected by the diadem too, wonder if maybe everyone is right to despair because there seems to be little chance of anyone else winning the competition other than Mushi. Their own goddess didn't think they could beat Mushi, that's why she sent him in the first place. Finally, the diadem is taken off the stage and hidden, and the competition starts in earnest. Everyone except for Kaveh and Scaramouche is preparing to not try as hard as they probably would have otherwise, but once they get some distance from the diadem, some of their drive comes back to them. Then the events play out very similarly to how they do in canon. Layla is the first to find the diadem and begins to rush back towards the podium, but Mushi, watching like a hawk from above as he has done in the earlier rounds, swoops down and takes it from her. Then, as he moves to fly back to the podium, everyone tries to block him from getting there and take the diadem for themselves. Mushi is very experienced in battle and very determined to get this stupid crown on that stupid podium. So he's doing very well at fending them all off, at least as they all try to take the diadem from him for themselves, working independently of each other. But then, as in canon, Kaveh, whether through an accident or sheer luck, or grabbing onto Faruzan's machines, or Sino getting a lucky hook of his polearm and dislodging the diadem from Mushi's grip, somehow Kaveh ends up getting the diadem. Mushi, horrified and beyond shocked, goes to take it back when all the other contestants realize one thing at the same exact moment. If they all focus on taking the diadem from Kaveh for themselves, Scaramouche will surely get it from either them or Kaveh in the scuffle. And then, in a way, they'll all lose to the man who's been nothing but mean-spirited, hostile, and underhanded since this competition began. But if they all, minus Kaveh, hold off Scaramouche while Kaveh makes the last stretch to the podium, Kaveh could actually win this thing. Through each of their minds, they think of what Kaveh's done for them in the competition, the kindness and selflessness that he has shown, supporting Layla when she was doubtful of herself, giving Tainari his water rations and escorting him almost all the way back to Aru village, offering Farazan the point when they worked together twice and refusing to accept her offer. And Sino knowing how kind Kaveh has been not just to Tainari, but to all the contestants and being the opposite of Scaramouche and not just following the letter of the law, but the spirit of it. Right then, all together, as if their minds and hearts were synced, Layla, Faruzan, Tainari, and Sino decide that more than wanting Mushi to not win the competition, they all know Kaveh deserves to win. His kindness to each of them would not go unpaid. And so, working together like a well-oiled machine, the 4 of them managed to hold Mushi off long enough for Kaveh to make it to the podium, just as occurs in canon. Mushi can barely believe what is happening. How are these pathetic, insignificant mortals actually keeping him from getting his mission done? Was that blonde-headed buffoon really going to win this entire? Kaveh, as in canon, slams down the diadem onto the podium, winning the Inner Darshan Championship for himself. Mushi, Alhaitham, Paimon, the Traveler, even Nilou and the crowd, and most of all, Kaveh himself, are completely shocked. He was actually able to pull it off. His fellow contestants, minus Mushi, are the only ones that look assured and satisfied. Then, before any celebration can occur, a dark, malevolent force comes out from the diadem. The sky darkens, the air becomes oppressive, and everyone feels the despair in their heart amplified. The despair and hopelessness brought out in each person is dependent on their outlook on life and how much they feel their actions matter and how much their lives matter. Some people are better off than others. Mushi is the most hard hit, and he's been literally forced to the ground at the enormity of the abyss of darkness that has opened in his mechanical heart, all of his nihilism utterly crippling him. What was the point? The point of any of this? He didn't matter. This didn't matter. Nothing did. 400 plus years of this cruel, uncaring world and people, and his accomplishment and entire life, 4 plus centuries of work, had been washed away completely in a single moment like a sandcastle on a seashore. He hadn't been able to save his friends. He hadn't been able to become a god. He hadn't been good enough for A, or Eldaltor, or anyone. He wasn't worth anything at all, and nothing he could ever do would change that. He started his life as a failure, and he'd end his life that way. He really was just everyone else's discardable, useless detritus. The traveler also was not doing so well. They had seen so much they wished they had not. Being burdened with Greater Lord Rukkhadevata's death and sacrifice nobody else could remember. Tepe's death. Kazari's from the Sakura cleansing quest. Death and betrayal and misfortune seemed to follow them like a dark sludge under their feet. And their sibling, their only family, their kin abandoned them. And they were so incapable as to not be any closer to finding them than when they first started this whole journey. And their sibling didn't want to be found. They didn't think the traveler was worth finding. The ache on our traveler's heart was almost too much to bear. They were better off than Mushi, but still in a bad state. Layla's self-doubt was amplified. Sure, she'd never succeed or be able to change into a more confident person. Farazan's depression at never being able to say goodbye properly to her loved ones from her true time, only to be plopped into one that is alien to her, isolating her further. Sino and Tainari were better off, but still disheartened. Sachin, as in canon, begins to give his speech about the future being bleak, and humans only ever being able to look forward to things constantly getting worse. He does remark about how Kaveh was not his chosen candidate, who most shared his ideals. In this version, Scaramouche, who was already pretty close to a nihilist, was his pick for his corrosive legacy. But Sachin remarks that Kaveh will still do. He tempts Kaveh with all his material wealth, more than Kaveh could ever want, as he does in canon. He's portrayed much more sinisterly here than he is in the original version, like a demon, whispering promises that sound nice but only lead to death in one's ears. Everyone is being slowly indoctrinated by his words, giving into their worst thoughts and deepest despairs. It all seems lost when Kaveh smashes the diadem. The spell is broken. Sachin and his wicked ideas are gone forever. Just like that. A force so powerful, gone by one simple act of one man's strength of character. "Are you all right?" is the first thing Kaveh yells. Everyone is in utter shock, especially Scaramouche, who had the weight of the world crushing him but a moment ago, but now he feels light and unburdened. Everyone slowly gets to their feet, being shocked and unable to process what just happened. They begin to question how Kaveh could have rejected Sachin's offer so quickly. Anything he could have ever desired would have been his. Kaveh gives the same response he does in canon, saying that Sachin was evil and his ideas were horrible and destructive. He would never perpetuate those ideas. Alhaitham also wonders aloud about his friend's decision, but Kaveh remains steadfast in his belief that he just did the right thing. The traveler, still seeing that Mushi is unable to get up off the ground, goes to him, remembering their conversation with Nahida earlier, and helps him up. Mushi is too shocked to protest the assistance, utterly rattled and in disbelief by how helpless he had been rendered in a single instant. Kaveh asks Mushi, seeing the traveler help him up, if he's all right, looking genuinely worried, even after all the cruel barbs and mockery and derision Mushi had thrown at him throughout the competition. Mushi weakly nods, not knowing what he could possibly say or what just happened. As everyone sits around trying to recover, Kaveh chooses to check on people since he's fine himself. Nahida shows up amongst the chaos, having sensed a dark, powerful energy from the city and coming to see if everyone was okay. She looks over everyone, makes sure they're safe before going to the Traveler and Mushi for a report. The Traveler, quick to pull themselves back together, explained Sachin's evil influence and that he had abandoned his own family and given up on the world, only to place his consciousness in the diadem to infect young, vulnerable scholars with his poisonous ideas. Nahida is surprised by this and is glad everyone is all right. She never thought whatever was off about the diadem was so serious. She never would have let it into the competition if she realized the destruction it could have caused. Mushi can't even look at her. 1, he's still in shock. 2, he just lost the competition to mortals. And not just to any mortal, to Kaveh, the stupidest mortal of the whole lot of these insignificant bugs. He failed to get the diadem, which was his whole mission, and not only that, he had been rendered completely helpless by it. If he had succeeded in getting it on the podium, he would have fallen for Sachin's offer instantly. He was self-aware enough to know that. He felt awful, like garbage, and scared. Scared Nahida would get rid of him now that she knew just how weak and useless he really was. He really didn't want to beg or make a fool of himself in front of the Traveler or all of these people, though, so he asked for permission to excuse himself. Nahida and the Traveler and even Paimon ask worriedly if he's okay, but he assures them he's just a tad tired after all that just happened, still avoiding looking at Nahida or really anyone directly. The Traveler and Nahida exchange worried looks, but Nahida gives him permission to specifically go rest. He nods and absconds quickly. To deal with the fallout, Nahida goes up and discusses things with Alhaitham and Nilou, then announces to Kaveh that while he smashed the diadem, according to the rules, all of Sachin's material possessions and wealth are still his. As he does in canon, Kaveh orders them to give Sachin's worldly fortune all away to poor people that really need it. He also does this to spit in the face of Sachin's philosophy, using his money to make people's lives better, proving how much effect just a little kindness can have in improving the world. Alhaitham again voices his disapproval, but Kaveh cuts him off in a real power move, telling him that he wouldn't expect him to understand, but that he stands firmly by his decision and he'd make it again 1,000 times if he had to. Alhaitham is stunned to silence. All the other contestants think this is super cool and amazing, and that Kaveh is super cool and amazing, and invite Kaveh out to a celebratory dinner that they are all attending. Alhaitham says, "Good grief," and takes off, and Nilou gets invited to join the meal too. Kaveh calls for the Traveler and Paimon to join as well, but the Traveler gives Nahida a worried look. Nahida mouths back that she'll handle Scaramouche. With that handled, Traveler could really use some levity and friends after all that, so they agree and the whole squad goes out for dinner in Sumeru City. Meanwhile, Scaramouche has returned to the sanctuary of Surasana because really he has nowhere else to go, but he despairs, still in shock that he probably won't be here very long now that he's failed Nahida. He wonders if he should take off now to avoid the humiliation of being thrown out on the street or locked up in a cage, but at this point, would really either of those outcomes matter? It seemed like no matter what he did, no matter what power or connections he accumulated, no matter how much he fought and tried, he always ended up in the same place, being unwanted, unloved, and all alone. Nahida returns to find him waiting. Scaramouche has decided on the only course of action that can make sense in his broken little brain right now, apologizing for his failure and begging for another chance. At least being the servant of a god was a more dignified existence than a homeless, vagrant wanderer drifting from place to place without any purpose or connections or anyone to care or even know if he lived another day, or a caged up prisoner in the dirty bowels of this rotten academia. He swiftly apologizes for his failure and promises passionately it won't happen again, that if she just gives him another chance, he'll make sure he doesn't fail her again. He had said the words many times before to his mother. He would have said them to El Dottore if El Dottore had waited around for even enough time for him to do so. It stung his great pride, but at this point, his ego had been so battered and broken, it was easier than it should have been. He wasn't as valuable as he once was, after all. Nahida takes his hands in hers, surprising him as she asks, "What failure are you talking about?" He looks to her with shocked purple eyes. "What?" Nahida continues, "The only promise I made you promise, your most important mission, was that you'd be careful and take care of yourself." Mushi looked to her with confusion as she said with her green, kind eyes sparkling,
Now, if you didn't do that, I would be upset with you. But look at you.
Some blush fell over Scaramouche's cheeks, if he even can blush, but whatever, it's my rewrite.
You did a great job.
She uses his new real name here. Oh, what are you talking about? Flustered and mind reeling, looking for tricks and wondering what she was up to, he yanks his hands out of hers and hisses, I failed all my tasks. I lost the competition. I didn't get the diadem. That stupid blonde mortal Kaveh took it from me. Scaramouche's face was struggling with vexation and distress.
Nahida said softly, That's okay. I finally got to know what was up with that strange circlet, smiling gently. With a little giggle, she remarked, So your mission was accomplished after all.
Scaramouche just looks at her like she's an alien. How could she not be furious and displeased if he were the god of Sumeru and one of his attendants had failed at a task he had assigned them as badly as he just had? He would have them executed for their ineptitude. And she, what? Just was totally okay with it? Not bothered at all? How could that possibly be possible? Was this some kind of advanced mind game she was playing? Some long thought out way to manipulate him like El Dottore had done to him? But as far as Mushi could tell, Nahida didn't have any reason to manipulate him. He'd already pretty much do whatever she asked. She was his last hope for anything even close to the life he had built for himself before. He was at her mercy. She had to know that, right? So what was up with that happy, unbothered look on her face?
The most important thing is that everybody was okay, Nahida said with a soft, happy smile, including you, of course.
A strong blush grew over Mushi's cheeks. Was this child god absolutely insane? Or just stupid? Or was he being stupid? Being unable to realize how this was designed to manipulate him? Mushi had no idea what to do at this point. He had failed devastatingly, almost in every way possible, lost that foolish mortal Kaveh, and she wasn't mad at all. In fact, she seemed happy he was all right. What did that mean? What was he supposed to do with that? He certainly should be punished for failing, right? Testing her, he said in a tight voice, So you're really not upset or angry at all? Nope, Nahida chirped, and Mushi narrowed his eyes at her further. Why not? Or was it a trick? Mushi looked away and thought a moment. Well, wasn't this a good thing? He tried to force himself to think rationally, despite how uneasy and strange this made him feel. But couldn't this only be a good thing for him? He didn't want to be thrown out onto the street like a stray dog, or locked up in some dingy cell that would not befit someone as great as he was. So maybe he should just accept this strange, childlike god's kindness? He blushed again at the thought. He didn't like it. What? She was just being merciful to him? Ugh, ridiculous. Someone as powerful as him did not need anyone's mercy or compassion. He was fine on his own. Still, though his chest felt strange and warm, it was uneasy. He couldn't deny this benefited him, though. He wanted to be Nahida's servant, a trusted one. He didn't have anywhere else to go. He had served the Tsaritsa for many years, and that had been a prestigious enough position to keep him satisfied for a few centuries, so maybe being Kusanali's attendant would be enough for now. And if his employer had low standards for his performance, couldn't that only be a positive? He wouldn't have to be so worried about losing everything if he messed something up, which he seemed to be doing a lot of these days. So I can stay with you then? Mushi asked tentatively, unsurely, ready for the rug to be pulled out from his feet any second now. Nahida nodded eagerly. Of course, we're family now. Family? He shot back, more shocked than anything. Nahida giggled playfully, scratching behind her head.
Is that too fast? We could just be friends first, but I've always wanted a family. But friends will do, if you're willing, of course.
Now Mushi's brain was just broken. He just surrendered to his strange whims. Whatever makes you happy for me to stay here.
Yay!
Nahida clapped her hands happily, and Scaramouche was so emotionally exhausted and tired of thinking he just gave up as she took his hand gently.
I hear all the contestants of the Interdarshan Championship are having a celebratory meal right now. You competed too, and as a frontrunner for so long.
Mushi blushed at the praise.
It's wrong to not have you there. Let's go join them.
As Nahida began to pull him away towards the door of the sanctuary, he protested as they went,
Are you crazy? I wasn't exactly a ray of sunshine to the fellow contestants, Nahida. I'm sure I won't be welcomed there. Nahida giggled, dragging him along. Only one way to find out, Mr. Hat Guy. Mushi groaned, and out the doors they went. The two arrive at the restaurant with the traveler, Paimon, Tainari, Sino, Layla, Faruzan, Kale, who had come for her master Tainari, and Nilu are all eating at. There's a slight silence when Nahida pulls Mushi up to the table, still holding his hands, Mushi hiding slightly in the shadow of his hat. We heard you guys are having a meal to celebrate Kave's victory. We wanted to join in. Is that all right? The traveler is already smiling brightly. Everyone else was very shocked to see the Dendro Archon herself dragging an abashed-looking hat guy in tow. What was that all about? It was Kave who broke the silence, standing up with a grand smile and inviting gesture. Of course! Gather in, everyone! The food is so good here. Alhaitham has no idea what he's missing. He is really such a jerk sometimes. Here, sit. Labad, can we get another few plates of fish rolls over here? Thank you! Nahida and Mushi sat down, and Mushi hissed into her ear. This is embarrassing. Nahida giggled back his way of answer, and Traveler whispered over, Nice to see you here. He gave them a don't even try it look, which made them laugh. Everyone gathered quickly, and they began to talk and relax as they recounted everything that had happened over the course of the competition and everything afterwards. It's nice and peaceful, and while Mushi looks uncomfortable at first, he quickly begins to relax. The Traveler and Nahida pulling him into the conversation, and none of the other contestants really holding his behavior during the competition against him in the aftermath. They had won in the end after all, and everyone had seen his state when Sachin had brought the full weight of his despair onto them, so everyone was quick to let bygones be bygones. Scaramouche even mumbles an apology to Kave at Nahida's prompting as the night goes on, and Kave simply slaps his back in a friendly way, which Mushi flinches at, and assures him that it's all in the past, that they should drink up now, clinking their glasses together, which makes Mushi smile slightly. Late into the night, the traveler comes outside to find Mushi standing alone on the deck of the tavern. They smile to him knowingly. Okay out here? He scoffed a little, but there was no bite to it. You mortals really know how to party, that's for sure. It's a bit much for me. Such an old man, the traveler teased, coming up beside him to take in the night breeze. Mushi shook his head and said quietly, looking out to the stars, I think I know why Kave beat me, as unfortunate as it was. This is the first time he addresses Kave by his name aloud. Traveler rolled their eyes at that. Mushi says quietly, looking up at the stars, He's physically pretty weak. Most mortals are, but inside... Scaramouche puts a hand over where his heart would be. Kave is strong. He gave the traveler a self-conscious glance, but traveler resists the opportunity to tease and instead nods, looking up to the night sky. Stronger than the two of us, I'm afraid, they say back. And Mushi laughed, not missing an opportunity to tease. You think the great Kave could take you down in a fight? You, the great traveler? The traveler laughed, shaking their head, before more solemnly voicing aloud, He really is an amazing guy. I'm shocked you came to the party. Do you not want me here? No, that's not it. I didn't think it'd be your scene. It's not. The child god dragged me here. But you're having fun, right? Yeah, Mushi chuckled a little. Less dramatic than a Fatui Harbinger banquet, but it has its own charms, it was said waggishly. Traveler laughed brightly and then grabbed him by the arm, insisting, Come back in. I want to see if Madame Faruzan can beat Kave in a drinking contest. We should have a drinking contest. Something you used to do with the Fatui? Yeah. You are such an evil little... I know. They laughed together as they went back in to join the party. End of Act 3. Well, did you love it? I'm sorry. I hope so. Anyway, now I'm going to go ahead and justify some of the things I did in my rewrite and explain some of those decisions that I made further. So one question I'm guessing a lot of people might have is, why did you basically turn this into a Scaramouche quest? And like, one, because he's a sleigh and he's my baby and I'm in love with him. But two, I can't, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. 2, I don't think it is fully about him. But yes, I did choose to make him the emotional core of the story, him and Kave both. But the focus ends up being more on him because he's the one that has to learn and change and have his worldview challenged throughout the quest. Kaveh actually acts as a static character in this rewrite, which is totally valid, because Kaveh would have made the choice to smash the diadem before the quest even began, as he does at the end. He, unlike Mushi, has his worldview validated and his views enforced. Static characters aren't always the enemy, and they can provide good different purposes in a story. Not every character needs to like change or grow to be useful in writing a story. In my rewrite, Kaveh and his belief systems that one can change their own fate, and that selflessness and kindness and compassion are not a waste of time and they'll not keep you from achieving your goals, and that doing things in the right way will be rewarded in the end, are the foil to Scaramouche's own self and his deeply held beliefs that the only way to get what you want is to be as cutthroat as possible. People set out just to use and abuse one another, and even then, the cruel fate of the world may take away what you want, because ultimately the world is uncaring and bleak, and no matter how hard you try, in the end, it ultimately doesn't really matter. The reason I chose Scaramouche as my emotional core was because I felt like he was a modern day version of Sachin, and in my story, unlike the original, we're taking a more hard-line stance that Sachin's research and actions are not valuable but just flawed and corrosive and toxic. Because we've taken this as our hard-line thesis, we have a clear character arc for one of our characters to learn that such belief systems like nihilism are wrong. The original quest, one of its most grave problems is that it does not have an emotional core. It kind of focuses on everyone, and in doing so, it focuses on no one and nothing. I remember playing it, and halfway through the second chapter, I realized as a player I had no idea what I was doing. What was I meant to be focused on? What story was I meant to care about? I was left lost adrift because there was no emotional core to hook me in and keep me focused. And the original quest, I would say that the main focus, if I had to pick one, is actually probably Sachin's story, but we don't spend enough time with Sachin or learning about him to make that interesting or someone we actually care about. All we learn about him in game is that he was a pretty awful guy. He abandoned his family, fed his own depression with depressing nihilistic research for years, and then instead of overcoming his sorrows and trying to make the world a better place, or just simply being there for his loved ones, he gives up on life and kills himself. He's not an admirable or likable character. He's pretty much the definition of unlikable and off-putting. Don't get me wrong, the writer certainly didn't put too much effort into humanizing him, but that's my point. It's the focus, but barely, and there's 1,000 other things going on in the story, too many things, and not one thing to draw us back and keep our attention. I knew we were in trouble during midway through Act 2, like I said. The story's all over the place, too jumbled, too many ideas, and no emotional through line. My brother, when I discussed this with him, he said that perhaps they were trying to make a comparison between Sachin and Kaveh, and that the emotional climax was supposed to be Kaveh smashing the diadem at the end and rejecting Sachin's conclusions. But they don't do a great job, or basically any job at all, of comparing Kaveh and Sachin, comparing and contrasting them, pointing out similarities as the quest continues. So therefore, that's just totally invalid, and I did not even know that until he brought it up, and that's just one thing they could have been attempting to do. But once again, it's not focused on, there's a million things happening, they can't commit to one thing. You may have noticed in my version that I removed Dia, Candace, and Dory from my story, and that's because they serve no purpose in mine or the main storyline. They serve only as fun cameos, and while I'm sure people who have them as their favorites enjoyed seeing them, they serve no purpose in the story and only bloat and distract from the story at hand. Emotional cores are not always character arcs, but usually are. They can also be characters' relationships with one another, or an overall idea or theme. Like for Lantern Rite 2023, the main themes were music and how it affects our lives, and moving forward in life past grief and hardship, and healing from it with the compassion and company of friends, both old and new, both of those themes. It wasn't one specific character that had an arc, but it was those themes that we as an audience kept being returned to, and that also made for a fulfilling story. An emotional core to a story is extremely important for a story to function properly, because otherwise the audience is left feeling, as I was in the original questline, directionless,
aimless. Why should I care? What should I be focusing on? What's the point of any of this? Most of the time, the emotional core of a story is a character or characters having or completing a character arc, whether big or small. There are also stories that lack such character arcs but are still successful stories by focusing on more external threats to the characters. Shadows Amidst Snowstorms is a good example of this. No one character there has a true arc, but the emotional through line is still there and the focus is clear from start to finish. In Shadows Amidst Snowstorms case, the emotional core of the story is very simple. We, as the traveler, don't want to see our friend Albedo or our other friends be killed and replaced by a doppelganger. As funny as it may sound saying it plainly aloud like that, that is the emotional core of the story and a completely valid one. It lets the audience know very quickly why they should care and why they should be invested. It's also a pretty easy emotional core for a story to start with, since if you've done even a halfway decent job of writing the characters, most of your audience will not want them to be killed. Regarding my rewrite, I could have gone many directions with the emotional core. I could have made Kaveh the emotional core and still kept Mushi as the antagonist to him. I could have had Kaveh begin to doubt and waver on his beliefs throughout the competition, wondering if maybe there is nothing he could do to control his fate and falling into despair, only for him to re-find his conviction and defeat Sachin and his wicked temptations by smashing the diadem at the end. Or I could have chosen a different character altogether to be the emotional core. The Traveler could have learned something, or Layla, or Tainari, or Sino, Farazan, heck, even Paimon. Since the original quest didn't have an emotional core, I was pretty much free to do whatever I wanted. I chose Mushi because I thought Kaveh's virtue and steadfastness in his beliefs in the canon version and not hesitating to break the diadem and being confident in his choice was admirable, and I wanted to keep that lack of hesitation and virtue within Kaveh intact. Mushi was the perfect one to have a character arc because he best aligned himself with the beliefs of nihilism and was the most polar opposite in his belief system to Kaveh's own optimism, and Kaveh is our shining beacon and good moral example in this quest. I thought two people with completely opposite belief system going head to head in a competition and having their beliefs tested would make for interesting conflict and drama and would give the audience a clear focus. Who will win the tournament? Scaramouche, with his beliefs that you have to be cold-blooded and only out for yourself to win, or Kaveh, with his beliefs that if you do things with compassion and dignity, life will provide a way for you. A pessimistic nihilist versus a bleeding heart optimist. I also don't believe I fully abandoned the nuance of the ending of the original quest, where Nahida says that there is good and bad in the world and that both are a valid part of its existence. Kaveh, in my rewrite, doesn't get everything he wanted. He's kind and selfless and sticks to his beliefs to a fault, but in the end, he's still in crippling financial debt and an unhappy living situation. But he makes the most of it and doesn't fall into despair at the outcome, celebrating, like Nahida, that the most important thing was everyone's safety and the bonds between them. Nahida and Kaveh also mirror one another in how they both challenge Scaramouche's deeply held notions about how people are naturally selfish and only want to use one another for their own ends. Kaveh with his kindness shown towards his competitors throughout the competition, and Nahida in her kindness she shows towards Mushi himself. Both of them play an important narrative role in softening Mushi's heart and making him begin to doubt his own beliefs that the world can't be changed and that it's an overall cruel and bleak place. They both offer another answer, a better way. Kaveh defeating Scaramouche and winning the contest, and his lack of hesitation in smashing the diadem and his conviction and his choice afterwards thoroughly shakes Mushi's beliefs. It is also his own weakness to Sachin's powers that makes Mushi realize he needs to reassess. His current mindset and beliefs were not only beaten by Kaveh and Kaveh's own worldview, but became a dangerous and exploitable weakness for him in a tangible way that he could see. And in Scaramouche admitting to the Traveler at the end of the quest that Kaveh was strong, he basically acknowledges that his mind has been changed, that Kaveh's belief system proved to not only be better, but something which gave Kaveh more strength than him, which is something Mushi desperately admires, strength. This quest also serves to humble Mushi further, as this is still the man who thought himself worthy to be a god over others less than probably a month ago in the canon timeline. In him being beaten by a bunch of mortals, he is forced to acknowledge not only their strength, but his own weaknesses and shortcomings. He falls into despair after this realization comes, his ego crushed, but Nahida and the Traveler serve the important role of beginning to change Scaramouche's ideas of his own self-worth.
Before this, Mushi tied his self-worth to his physical strength, his power over others, his superiority intellectually or incompetency over others, the amounts of feats achieved, the number of enemies crushed and defeated, how many missions were completed successfully. Those were the factors that determined the weight of one's worth in his eyes at the beginning of the quest, which is why he can't understand or stand when Kaveh helps his competitors in the championship, because to Scaramouche, winning the Inner Darshan Championship and winning the diadem is a mission, a silly mission perhaps, but if Kaveh loses, his worth in Mushi's eyes will decrease. Perhaps subconsciously, this is why he lashes out at Kaveh so much throughout the competition, because Scaramouche subconsciously envies not tying one's own worth to the amount or impressiveness of one's own accomplishments. Once again, Mushi was not the only valid choice to be the emotional core of the storyline, but since the original writers didn't have an emotional core, I was free to choose whatever I wanted to be that emotional core. I also thought it would be fitting for Mushi to play a big role in the story because one, the last time we saw him was in the Archon quest where he underwent quite a lot of changes, and the audience is probably very interested in seeing how he will be dealing with his entire world changing almost overnight, and how he will begin to grow and change and hopefully become a better person in Sumeru. Another smaller thing I changed was not having Mushi be the one to give Tainari his water rations in the desert. I thought in the original it was a little goofy for Scaramouche to selflessly go out of his way to give Tainari water in the desert when he was hurting. Sure, Mushi has been softened up some recently, but enough to do a random act of kindness for a random mortal he really has never met for no other reason other than he felt like it. Of course, he didn't need the water himself, but it was still, in my opinion, a pretty out of character action. I think at some point, Mushi can definitely become that kind of person who is just kind enough to do that for someone he doesn't know that well. But in my opinion, he still has a lot of growing and changing to do first. Sure, in his Archon quest, Scaramouche learned that one of his betrayals was actually set up and manipulated by El Del Torre, and that El Del Torre has been manipulating him and using him for years as his experiment without Mushi's knowledge. But really, wouldn't that just make him turn against the Fatui and El Del Torre most of all, not just randomly make him into a person to go out of his way for a mortal he's never even met? Of course, after his Archon quest, he also feels a strong debt to Nahida and most especially the Traveler, and he feels indebted and at least some affection towards them. He also now knows that many of his presumptions he had built his worldview on were wrong, manipulated by someone with bad intent. But many of his beliefs still go unchallenged. A still abandoned him. He still sees the world as a cruel and uncaring place, and the actions that he takes to better his life pointless. In fact, his nihilism is probably worse than ever when he realized that even after giving it all he had, he couldn't change the fate of those friends who did not abandon him all those years ago. In his mind, the world is just as horrible and random and unfair, and that's all it is. His voice lines in-game now reflect some of these sentiments.
There's no such thing as pure freedom in this world. Even the wind cannot blow on forever. Fundamentally speaking, there's little difference between snow and rain, yet people lavish praise only upon the former. Fate can be truly arbitrary.
In fact, Scaramouche's fatalism may be even stronger now that all his accomplishments he had done as the balladeer have been wiped clean from existence, and all his colleagues in the Fatui and any single person he had an emotional connection to, no matter how slight, their memories of him are completely gone, except for his connection to the Traveler and Nahida, which is depressing as all hell, and has to make one feel pretty small, and their faith in the world decrease to beneath the earth. My point is, Mushi still has a lot of opinions that need to be challenged and shifted for him to grow into a happier, healthier, kinder, more benevolent person. You don't spend 300 plus years with a Fatui and have all of that mental conditioning gone overnight. He's also been a pretty significant character in the game story, so I think dedicating the emotional growth in this story to him is a nice touch. I mean, for the original, Scaramouche basically does nothing in the quest. He doesn't try to win for the first 2 rounds, does at the end only to lose to Kaveh, but he doesn't even have any thoughts or opinions about losing to a mortal. The man so prideful as to not long ago call himself an all-knowing god. Heck, he calls himself that every week when I fight him in his domain. The writers don't do anything with him in the original. Sure, he's helping Nahida with investigating the diadem and defeating Eremite mercenaries that were hired to kidnap Sachin. See, I literally am not quite sure what the full extent of his task assigned from Nahida. Like, what is it? Like, I don't even know what it is exactly. I think it's like, I don't know, investigating the diadem, maybe. That's how little he's focused on in the canon quest. Also, another thing is him and Nahida's relationship, which I've always been super interested in, isn't explored in the original quest either. At the end of the canon quest, we see them together and we learn he does tasks for her. He refers to himself as a prisoner and she doesn't contradict him, saying playfully that even prisoners deserve an education. So, is he a prisoner or not? I think he might be in name only, since I'm not sure what Nahida would do if he just, flew away. I'm pretty sure she would just let him go, but also, I'm not sure, so, that's not good. Nahida's and his relationship can be as mother-son, hurt and comfort fanfic, or as cordial and businesslike as the writers want it to be, but it should be conveyed clearly to the audience what their relationship is like so we can better understand both of them. Nahida in the canon quest also says she wanted him to learn to interact with others well, but says this idea didn't work, which is implying their relationship is more affection-based, mother-son-esque. But Mushi acts very businesslike to her, and that's fine, but then how does he see her? As his boss? As his captor? He is the one that brings up the prisoner comment, so does he feel like a prisoner? Is he a prisoner? There is just a lot of ambiguity there, and some ambiguity is fine, but this is too much. We should have some idea of the relationship dynamic between two important characters in the game. For example, when we first meet Kaya and Diluc in-game and see them interact on screen together, we know some things from just their single first interaction on screen. We learn that they were once close, things have soured, Kaya has more affection towards Diluc than Diluc has in return, worrying about him, and Diluc is more cold towards Kaya. We, then, as the audience, don't know every nitty-gritty detail of their relationship and everything that has transpired between them at that point in the story, but it's enough of an idea to form a clear relationship between them in our head as the audience. It's important for the audience to have some understanding of the relationships between characters in a story to better understand both of those characters individually, and for the fictional world to feel more believable, dynamic, and alive. In my rewrite, there is no ambiguity about their relationship. Nahida cares about him maybe more than she even should, and Mushi at first thinks that she is just using him as a tool, but by the very end of the quest, he begins to soften to the idea that perhaps she actually cares about him and wants what's best for him. He hasn't fully come to terms with the idea yet by the end of my quest, but it's an idea his brain is starting to consider. Once again, this is not the only valid way to do their relationship, and the writers can do it however they choose, but it should be made clear what their relationship is and what it is like in the game. We don't have to know everything, but we need enough to form an idea, because right now, it's too ambiguous, in my opinion. So yeah, that's basically everything I wanted to clarify or expound on. Thank you for everyone who watched the video, and I hope you all enjoyed the rewrite. I personally thought it was good, even if I maybe had too much fun writing about Sad Boy Hot Boy Mushi, but regardless, I think it came out good. Let me know what you think in the comments if you enjoyed, or how you would have rewritten the Inner Darshan Championship storyline if you were able to rewrite it. Love you all, and I wanted to remind you that if you're going through something difficult right now, Jesus loves you, you're cared about, you're loved, you're important, you're valuable, and if things are tough right now, if you're struggling, they will get better. You're strong and important, and if you are looking for a sign, are things gonna get better? This is it. They're gonna get better. Jesus died for your sins, and he loves you very, very, very much, more than you could ever know. And I love you all again, and I just want you guys to have a wonderful day or night, and I hope that I get to see you all again very, very soon. Bye!